Let's turn now to Pennsylvania, where we find Ed O'Keefe, our friend. He's in Pennsylvania. He's in Philadelphia, it looks like, the beautiful Independence Hall behind you, Ed. And you've been talking to some of the power brokers in the city, like Congressman Brendan Boyle. What are you learning?
That's right, Bob. Good to see you. Look, the president has arrived. He's on his way to a fundraiser just a few blocks away near what they call the largest Wawa in the world. Who knew that such a thing would be tracked? He's here for a closed-door fundraiser with John Fetterman, the Democratic Senate candidate, who appeared with him earlier today at what they call an official event. Official because it was basically just the president and elected officials over in Pittsburgh at the site of that bridge that had collapsed in late January, right as the infrastructure bill was being passed and touted by the president. Notably, Fetterman showed up today in a tie. Remember, he's been the candidate that is known for campaigning in a hoodie and shorts, and today hanging out with the president in far more formal attire. Here in Pennsylvania, they see what we're seeing, Bob, tightening polls that suggest this is a 2 or 3 point race, 1 or 2 point race, some that perhaps are less reliable, suggesting it's a tie game. Either way, with 3 weeks to go, the president believing that by coming here today and making plans to be here again even next week with the vice president in tow, they can start to build the momentum needed for Democrats in these closing weeks. We spoke with Congressman Boyle, but we also heard today from Cedric Richmond, who's, of course, the former head of public engagement at the White House at an event hosted by CBS News. He was asked about the fact that the president continues to hold these official events, less overt campaign rallies. Why is that? Well, listen to what he had to say.
You have to talk to voters and just articulate the accomplishments. So that's why you see President Biden out doing more policy-type events than rallies, because he's touting what we've been able to do and been very intentional about it. So I just think that Democrats have to do that. And the hard part of campaigning is knocking doors, talking to voters.
Ed, when you
and what's
listen
notable
to
is Cedric.
Oh, go ahead, Ed.
Go ahead, Bob.
Tell me what's on your mind. What's in your notebook, Ed?
Well, what's interesting about that is, again, the White House has been taking great pains to suggest that the campaigning is coming, but that they feel this is an effective way to get him out here. Here's the issue. It's been mostly these sort of small events. You don't get a lot of interaction with the general public, but they feel this is the way to do it because it allows him to go out and remind people about the infrastructure bill, as he did today in Pittsburgh, about the Inflation Reduction Act, about the other steps he's taken this week in terms of student loans and abortion rights. And he hinted today at a stop in Pittsburgh that the campaigning is coming. We did talk to Congressman Brendan Boyle, who you mentioned, and he said he agrees that Democrats perhaps need to do a better job of selling what they've done. Take a listen to what he said. Should more Democrats be willing to campaign with him publicly?
I certainly am. Now, granted, I am in a pretty Democratic district in Philadelphia, but here's what I say, and I say this quite proudly. This president and this Congress has had the most successful Democratic policy, domestic policy record since the 1965-66 Congress.
Boyle also suggested, Bob, that Democrats need to do a better job of selling what they've done. Again, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, the gun control measures that were passed over the summer. He comes from a very blue part of Pennsylvania. This, in fact, is in his district. No doubt about who wins around these parts, as you know quite well. But I think the argument he's making is they've done a lot of big things. He argues the biggest legislative achievements since the 1960s. Why aren't Democrats proudly campaigning on that? He'd like to see more of it.
Ed, you're laying out how the Democrats feel like they need to talk about their legislative accomplishments that they view as very positive for the economy. They need to talk about their policies. But you're such a great reporter on President Biden, having covered his campaign. And as I look at you in Philadelphia there, I keep thinking back to September and the speech he made on democracy in Philadelphia, in that same area, that same neighborhood. And I wonder, as a longtime reporter on Biden, on the campaign and now at the White House, are you hearing that from the White House, from Fetterman, this democracy idea that he articulated in September? Because you look at Pennsylvania, there's Doug Mastriano, the Republican gubernatorial nominee, has been an election denier. Josh Shapiro's talked about it. But what about from the president? And where is democracy in the Pennsylvania discussion?
Well, I mean, given that Mastriano appears to be fading as a candidate, I mean, I saw advertising again today that reminds viewers that he was in Washington on January 6th and has said he would potentially not certify the results of a Pennsylvania election if he had questions about it. It doesn't come up much here. It doesn't come up much across the country. There was one survey today that suggests only about 2% of House Democratic advertising, for example, even mentions January 6th and the concerns about democracy. The candidates see the polling we see, which is that the economy and inflation are the top of mind concerns. Yes, there were some over the summer, especially at the height of the January 6th committee hearings, that suggested that people were concerned about the future of democracy. And they're concerned about the fact that Democrats and Republicans can't work together, can't even be in the same room together and have civilized conversations. The president wanted to give that address because it remains a bedrock reason for his continued political existence, that he's defending and wants to see democracy thrive not only in this country, but around the world. So the White House will defend his decision to give that speech until he's out of office. But politically, it didn't necessarily give him the bounce that they might have hoped for, other than to lay down the marker again and say the Democratic Party and this president are working on defending democracy, Republicans are not, and there are deniers on the ballot. Has that moved the needle here in Pennsylvania or anywhere else? I don't think we're going to get a good gauge of that until Election Day. The other thing to point out, since you mentioned this, yes, this is a president who comes here quite frequently. We should remind people why. Obviously, born in Scranton, lives only about 45 minutes away in good traffic at Wilmington. This is the 14th visit he has made to Pennsylvania since he became commander-in-chief. Next to Delaware and his stops in Camp David, he comes here most often. There's a calculation that says you win the Senate seat here and everything else holds, although the Nevada numbers suggest they might not, you can at least get back to an even 50-50 Senate, maybe 51-49. This is the one he wants to help with because he believes he understands the politics of the Keystone State better than most, and we'll see.
Ed, when you said why, I thought you were going to say cheesesteaks. As a Philly guy, I do miss them. They're not the same here in Washington. Hopefully you can get one during your trip there. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much.